He called his escorts Click and Clack, mainly from the sound of the carapaces. They didn't speak as they herded him down the passageway, but the message they gave was loud and clear. It was evident in the way he wasn't restrained at all, the casual gait of the backwards canted legs of his captors, and the disdain of the looks of those passing by the trio. He gave Click and Clack no reason to talk, and the two guards had no interest in doing anything but conveying him to his final destination. Marcos Richards was fine with the silence. A decade prior, he arrived on Beta Carene Prime, digital ink barely dry on his retirement orders. 20 years in, Earth's ground forces gave him enough of a nest egg to start a farm, a lifelong dream. Acres of land on a frontier world was his for the taking, and Marcos did, planting seeds from Earth to feed himself and his fellow colonists. Beta Carene Prime had soil rich in everything plants craved, and Marcos raised his crops in much the same way he raised soldiers over the years. Orderly rows of vines and stalks marched from the centre of his land, the lines ruler straight and laid out in a no-nonsense way. When the Zurfeks attacked the frontier 4 years before, Marcos took note of what the giant crustaceans did and acted in accordance with training beaten into his mind over the decades. He sent as much of the harvest as he could to the war effort. He cut his profits to where it was barely keeping the farm running. Still, Marcos was used to sacrificing for the United Earth Armed Forces, and he was liked by the banks and the people of Beta Carene Prime. Besides, if his fruits and vegetables could feed a few soldiers fighting the aliens, then the pain was worth it. As the Zugfuchse moved farther into human-controlled space, and closer to Beta Carene, Marcos sighed, and had the local militia reactivate his implanted transponder. While he had hoped to never have the thing turned back on, since it always gave him a headache, he was used to the pain. When the militia scanned the device, Marcos was immediately made the commander of the militia, much to his chagrin. His years of command were long ago and far behind, he had said. Let him just be a soldier. The militia ignored him, of course, but assured he would only have to be in charge in the unlikely event the crustaceans shop in orbit. Surely the war will be over before then, they said. A week before, the first Zugfuchse scout ships arrived in Beta Carene. Marcos was the first at the militia muster site, getting all 3,000 militia members into some form of order. They were farmers, cattle herders, administrators. Most had some military training, mainly the older folks, and Marcos had them keep the younger non-military militia in line. From doctrine, knowledge of the aliens, and hard experience, he knew 2 things. The first was, if he could marshal his forces properly, keep them in the back hills country, pick the right battlegrounds, and have a healthy dose of luck, Marcos could hold off the Zugfuchse for 6 days, perhaps 7. The second was the nearest large military force was 8 days away. By the time the flagship of the Zugfuchse arrived on the 6th day, Marcos and his militia gave the crustaceans several major defeats, though at great cost. Of the original 3,000, barely 200 remained. Though his militia had taken alien weapons, both handheld and field pieces, the militia was under no illusion they would throw off the invaders. Marcos told them every day they were not going to survive, but their sacrifice would not be in vain. The longer they held them at Beta Carene Prime, he said, the longer the United Earth Armed Forces had to mount a counter-offensive. What about us? The young asked. Why must we die for no reason? Marcos shook his head, telling them they died so others may live. It was cold comfort to the young. So he said history would speak of their heroism as long as there was humanity. So they had to make sure there still was a humanity. That mollified the youths, and they fought harder than before. It hurt Marcos to see his squad's eyes on the 7th day, open and unseeing. Their bodies were arrayed around him, split open or in pieces. They threw themselves at the aliens to keep him alive, all for nothing. He had taught them to sacrifice everything for the mission, for their fellow humans, and they took the lesson to its horrifying conclusion. When the Zugfuchse commandos took him prisoner, he went quietly. His weapon was empty, his heart shattered, as the faces looked through him, faces locked in their final rickers of pain and death. Their sacrifice tore his soul. The aliens hadn't done anything to him, leaving him in his cell for a few hours. Marcos had never heard of the Zugzugs taking prisoners, which meant something important was happening. The Universal Translator transponder allowed him to know what the crustaceans were saying out loud, but they also communicated non-verbally. Marcos simply waited for what would happen. When they brought him from his original cell in a forward operating base to a lumbering vehicle the size of a stadium, Marcos realized with some amusement this was a General's, likely the General's, mobile base. It was too grand and ostentatious to be anything else. It bristled with gun barrels, the treads were 30 meters tall, and crustaceans patrolled the battlements. Marcos was brought out of his reverie by a sharp tug from Click. The escorts halted him in the middle of a large circular office about 15 meters wide. Around him were the aliens, tall and covered in an exoskeletal carapace. They reminded Marcos of a bipedal crab, a comparison likely made by the first humans to see the Zugzugs. The largest, standing more than 5 meters, pointed a claw at Marcos. The translator came to life in his head, changing the clicks and hisses into understandable language for him. "Human," he said. "You are the commander of the other humans on this world." Marcos said nothing. "Do you know who I am?" it roared, lumbering toward him with claws raised. When Marcos said he didn't, it answered. "I am the Grand Claw of the Zugzugs, conqueror of 1,000 stars and dominator of the pathetic humans. Now, answer me. You are the commander of the human resistance on this planet, yes?" Marcos nodded. "Your fleet has arrived in system, human. They will arrive here in less than half a rotation. You have a choice." Marcos looked up at the crab, looking at the ice dogs with great interest. "With the forces I have here, I can have the entire surface glass and be well out of my way before your fleet reaches orbit. If you tell your resistance surrender, I will only glass half of the world. Due to your commanding the resistance, you must die, of course." Marcos shrugged. He expected that. "If you fail to do so," the general clicked, "I will order the destruction of this planet right in front of you." A membrane came halfway down on both eyes, almost like eyelids. "I would kill you last, so you may see what it means to disobey me. Surrender, and they live. Your decision." For a minute, Marcos stood still, his hands behind his back. He closed his eyes, inhaling deeply. He opened them. "My life, for the lives of my people." "If you surrender, yes," the claw hissed. "The translator does not translate everything humans say perfectly, but it gets the point across." Marcos nodded and held out a hand. "I'll need a communicator." The claw tilted his head to one side. "You would trade yourself for subordinates. Interesting." "I'm used to it." Marcos smiled tightly as he was brought to an alien communications terminal. The claw loomed over his shoulder, watching as Marcos manipulated the Zugzug's device. "You know our systems?" "A radio is a radio," Marcos said, "and a gun is a gun." He punched in the frequency for his main group, approximately 20 kilometers distant. They all work the same way. The claw said, "I almost regret you must die, human. We could learn from each other." Marcos shrugged again as the radio came to life. The carrier signal, loud and clear. "I'll have to speak the passphrase so they know it's me. Security, you know." When the crustacean flapped a massive pincer dismissively at him, Marcos smiled tightly. "Whatever you must do, human." "Clear channel," he said. The carrier signal disappeared immediately. "Richards, Phi Eta, 50-632. How copy?" "Reading 5 by," came the answer. "Package?" "Rolling Thunder, danger close. How copy?" There was a pause that extended half a minute. "Did they not understand your code words, Commander?" The claw seemed perplexed. "It is no wonder I am able to defeat you all so easily. You make things too complicated." "How copy?" Marcos repeated, ignoring the giant crab. Transit. The voice sounded odd to the claw, though all humans sounded odd. The line went dead. What was their answer? Marcos only smiled. You will have your answer in about 10 seconds.